Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is round 7 from the 2014 Sinquefield Cup between Maxime Vachier-Lagrave playing as white and Fabiano Caruana. Going into this round, Maxime has 2.5 points from the first 6, and Fabiano remains perfect with 6 out of 6. And this game here, potentially a historic one, going 7 out of 7, has never been seen before, at least at very high level of play. And keep in mind, again, this tournament here is the strongest ever, having nearly an average rating of 28.02. So let's see if Maxime can finally put a dent in this perfect streak. Okay. Maxime opening with d4, Fabiano replying d5. c4, e6, the queen's gambit declined. This does, however, turn into a Dutch stonewall, black eventually playing f5 and sinking that king knight into e4. So some natural moves to start: knight c3, bishop e7, bishop f4, knight f6, e3 castles, and now maybe the first moment to touch on, and that is after rook to c1. This move is maybe in some sense making the c5 advance a little less appealing, since the rook is already keeping a watchful eye over c5. Additionally, there might be this idea to not yet commit the light square bishop. You'll notice whenever there's this tension between the pawns, the light square bishop is not so quick to move. If black is to capture on c4, he will do so only after the bishop has committed itself to e2 or d3. And maybe even the knight on g1 wants to play to e2 or f3, and maybe white does not yet want to commit the knight to either square just yet. So you retain some options with these kingside minor pieces by playing the rook to c1. Okay, so the follow-up was knight on b to d7. You notice there was one other detail I did not touch on with rook to c1, and that is this idea to capture on d5 and then follow up with knight to b5. Which looks at first glance quite appealing. 3 pieces are hammering away at c7. What does black do? There's a simple reply: c6. This is nothing for black to worry about. This idea of white capturing on d5 and then playing knight b5 goes nowhere for white. If this was played, knight b5, here comes c6, and the knight now does best to go back to c3. But if he's following through and jumping into c7, well, that's painful. Got to go uncastled now, or go down a rook, or go down the exchange, I should say. And if the knight goes elsewhere, let's say d6, looking to pick up the bishop pair, well, here comes the queen. That's a check. You're going to go uncastled. You're going to throw your rook in a pin and allow knight b6 to a4 ideas, or are you going to do something that seems natural but is terrible? By playing queen to d2, you will have lost your bishop. My main point here is that this is not a threat to take on d5 and play knight to b5. So, what was played is c5, releasing the tension in the center, one day maybe looking for c6 if black does not play c6 soon enough, and also the idea of expanding on the queen side, getting in a b5 pawn break. Now, one of the principled follow-ups, or principled replies to c5 is to play knight to e4. Now that there's not as much tension on d5, not as much pressure, this knight is not needed to defend here, so maybe he can improve his position. Well, black does just that, knight e4, entering a central post. He's challenged and he's defended right away. This move right here spent, it took about 8 minutes. I believe the other move that was being considered is c6. You need to know on the black side that if you're playing c6, here comes bishop d3, you could forget about knight to e4. This is one of these now or never moments. If you're going to play knight to e4, you got to do it right away. So this is a direction black could have gone in with c6. And after bishop d3, this is the follow-up, b6, or in other words, or in summary, to be breaking on the queen side of the board. Okay. Well, we didn't have that. In the game it was, in fact, after c5, knight e4. White challenges the black piece in their position. That knight is going nowhere. It's cemented in there with f5. The drawback, of course, is that e5 is now a hole, and something white can hop right to. And so that's what we have, knight to f3. Seems natural, but it also took a good 10 minutes to make this natural-looking move. What exactly was white considering at this moment right here for move 9? Well, there's a very critical line. After knight f3, white has to weigh the following. Suppose g5, bishop back, f4, where's the bishop going? Nowhere, he's lost. White can follow up, however, with knight takes knight, pawn takes, bishop takes. He's got one pawn. If black goes in for the capture immediately, white gets now a second pawn and a file to play with. You'll notice we have a position here, an unbalanced position, where white has two pawns, and black has a minor piece and a weakened king. I believe this position right here, this unbalanced position, is one that both players weighed as being fine for white, preferable to play on the white side. Well, it's not a direction we went in, and I say that both players assessed that position as better for white because Caruana spent a bit of time here on his move 9 playing c6, spent nearly 15 minutes on this move here, not trusting his opponent that he had worked this all out correctly. He's also considering, should I play g5 at this moment? Again, I believe both players in the end assessed it as being better for white, better to play for white at least. Okay, the follow-up was c6. Sure enough, white occupies the weak square in the black camp. He's removed, and white has now a bishop on that square. That's looking to be removed. Bishop takes, queen takes, getting a new piece involved, and this is the next pawn break in the position, e5, something that cannot be stopped. f4 would be shot down with queen h4. So if you can't stop this advance, you might as well prepare for a new pawn structure. Knight e2 is a nice move, watching over these dark squares, the f4 and d4 pawn breaks. So sure enough, e5, might as well get rid of an unhealthy pawn for one that is perfectly healthy on d4. Also helping out the bishop by not having a pawn on e6, especially if you can follow up with f4 next or sometime thereafter. Then you have the f5 and g4 squares for the bishop. Okay, so as a follow-up, it was queen a4, watching over d4, trying to hold on essentially on the white side to the dark squares. If black follows with pawn takes, there's queen takes, and if we go without the queens on the board, I like this position as white, having a very strong knight on a dark square, having, I believe, a better bishop, with this pawn being fixed on a light square. Okay, well, we don't have that. It's not pawn takes in this position, but rather queen h4, pointing at f2, something that could be defended with castles, but we did not have castles in this position. In fact, white goes uncastled. The move played was g3, a very committal move, weakening these light squares. If castles in this position, we could be having a little bit of a back and forth if black so chooses with knight d2 and then knight back here. Maybe best is to just kind of be repeating. But that is not a direction we went in. g3 was the move played here. Again, very weakening to these light squares. This bishop's, his eyes start to open a little bit more, eyeing up h3, g4, g4 to f3 type of ideas. So queen g4, still staying in white's position. And now rook to f1. I thought initially this was to meet a move like knight g5, the move played in the game with knight to g1, just making sure this knight could be taken out if he's going to play there. But if knight g1, here comes f4. This position is blowing open and this king is caught in the middle. So very weakening position right here for white. Rook to f1, knight g5, and now the king takes a hike. He's just running for the hills right now. And black is going to try to go after him. This is happening, keep in mind, at a moment where the position in the center is not yet resolved. It's not closed. There's still this tension, and because of that, it can open up at any moment. One thing to note here, after this rook to f1 move and knight g5, after king d2, the knight gives a check. King c3, this is a moment here where I thought, what about e4? Okay, e4 was not played in the game. Knight takes h2, but what about e4? The idea being, after the bishop moves, now this knight is unprotected, and only at this point take on h2. And if rook here, you could grab the knight, and if rook takes knight, here comes this move f4, just blasting open the position. Something you certainly need to look a bit more closely at, because after g takes, there's actually rook takes. How's this working out exactly for black? Well, if the rook is taken, take note of these unprotected pieces that can be taken advantage of. There's a queen check. If king here, there's another check. You're going to lose that piece back. The position is opening up even more, and this king is still running for his life. We didn't go down that road. In this position, after knight to f3 and king to c3, was not e4, but rather black keeping this tension, not closing it up with e4, instead grabbing a pawn with tempo on the rook h1. The knight drops back, so black is up material. This king is still without a great home. Queen a5, looking to maybe get active on this c7 square. Queen g5. If the queen tries to get active, there's always rook f7. If queen to d6, there's now e4. Bishop c2, bishop d7. This queen is maybe close to being trapped. It's the only active piece for white, and there's still a lot of firepower around here on the black side. She does not make use of c7 in this position after queen g5. It's not queen c7, but rather pawn takes. Queen e7, keeping a watchful eye over both c5 and e5, maybe looking to take on e5 with check. In comes knight d4, trying to somehow manage it in a way where it stays relatively closed, but black strikes. This king is without a home. Let's open up the position. First taking on e5, b3, the king looks to run away. Well, he's actually having a very difficult time doing just that, having to defend the bishop. In comes b6. This position is getting blasted right open. C takes b, c5, there goes the knight's home. Got to go elsewhere. Knight b5, bishop b7. Now this is back on. Now that the rook is defended, a takes b is a threat, looking to sweep in to the white position with rook takes a2. Not to mention, here comes d4 with check, and there goes a rook in the corner. Not much that white can do about it. Taking on a7, in comes d4. That's a check. Pawn takes, knight takes bishop, king takes. This is all pretty much forced. Bishop takes rook. And now rook takes pawn. Are you going to go with the immediate recapture? That's a fork. There goes your rook. So what's tried is rook takes, check, very direct play, another check. King is running for his life. Another check. Now white is in a pin. Let's trade some pieces. In this position, black is up a rook, if you lost count. Bishop takes, knight happening. And now queen takes pawn, a central queen, still up the rook. The only concern is to make sure that these pawns don't get too far advanced, but that's just not going to happen. Rook c7, the threat was to capture on a7. Rook d8, looking to pick up the queen. This king has been walked right up the board here, and soon enough we're going to now have the white queen being won. After this check, it's king a6. Notice, ideas to try and block like this can always be met with mass exchanges, and black will be far quicker to get their pawn promoting. For example, king b5, a5 ideas. are met with g5. It's just much too slow. You could go with a6, and again, even if you push, just count. We got 2, and they have 5. Too slow is what I'm getting at. Trading down like this is just not working. King a6. That queen is pinned. Queen is dead. Doing something like this, you could just take and then take on a7. So what's tried in this position after rook to d6 is a5. One check is thrown in, another one is thrown in with queen to d5, and it is at this point that white resigns. There's nothing that you can do. After king to a6, you're taking the queen, you're taking the pawn. If this pawn pushes, there's a check. There's another check. The pawn goes down, and you have multiple ways to win. This is sufficient. Rook to b8. If there's a check here, the king simply steps up. Here's another check if you wanted, but this pawn is going nowhere, and if you really wanted to, black could continue marching and get a new queen. But as it was in this game, after queen to d5, it is at this point that Maxime resigns, that white resigns here, and with that, we pretty much have history here. 7 games in, 7 wins. Really spectacular stuff. Feel free to share what your thoughts are on this. The chess world has never seen something like this before. Fantastic play. So that's all for this video. As always, I hope you got something out of it. Take care. Bye. Topalov replying with the Sicilian. Knight f3, e6. d4, we have an open Sicilian, and to be a bit more exact, the Sicilian Taimanov.